Okay, so um, oh. So where did we leave off last time? So I guess all we have left is Hymn to Intellectual Beauty and Mont Blanc. And I want to start with Hymn to Intellectual Beauty because I feel like it's easier to understand, even though it's more abstract. Mont Blanc is trying to be very compressed, I feel. But I guess just talk about grades. So I'm getting there. Didn't I already do y'all's discussion posts? I think I did all yours, and then I did the 1302 class, and then essays are on their way. And you know, whenever you see yours pop through, they'll pop through. Probably sometime over the course of the weekend. Hopefully, if not, we'll see.
We're supposed to ask you to talk about Hitler's theory.
Hitler? Oh, Hitler. Oh, Hitler. The Hitler theory. Okay. Okay, well, we'll start with Hitler theory, I guess, which I'd forgotten about. But let us see. Crap. Let me see. Now I got to remember what the Hitler theory is or how I related it to this. Yeah, it's to a skylark, and I still have my pencil there, so I see it. We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Yet if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how that joy we ever should come near. Oh, right. Okay, so if you think about it, it's kind of this weird sort of irony that Shelley has this view of Wordsworth where, and I don't know why I haven't looked at it myself. I've never done that before, have I? Change the camera back to Summer Springs. There we go. So if you think about, if you take what he said logically to its conclusion, right, that he says, I know not how that joy we should ever come near. So he says the closest that we can get to that joy that makes your song, or that, you know, provides such a beautiful song that you have, is in the pain that we are able to feel, which you cannot. So in a sense, he's acting like, while ignorance is bliss, and it works to create your beautiful art, ignorance does not necessarily create beautiful art for us. Like, we can't do that. Like, if you had somebody who has no idea what's going on, or everything is just purely wonderful, and, you know, it provides no content for art. So if you think about, like, his view of Wordsworth, that Wordsworth's politics were unfortunate, and I believe that he was kind of leaning toward fascism at the end of his life, and that's what Shelley was responding against. If you think about what he's really saying here, fascism wouldn't be that terrible for art. I mean, it would be bad for people, but not that bad for art, because he says, like, the problems that we have, you know, as people are what make our art so beautiful. So some things I've heard about Hitler, I think I know about Hitler, have made me partially, you know, develop this crazy conspiracy theory, which I'm not saying is true. Let me preface this by saying that I'm not saying this at all. Has anybody ever seen Saving Private Ryan? The military, the World War movie from World War II? Yeah. Have you seen Schindler's List? Now, people have watched it because it's like 3.5 hours long, maybe 3 hours 45 minutes. It's a gorgeous film. It was actually 1994, but I think it was filmed in black and white, or 1993. Filmed in black and white, with it's got a little bit of color in it, but not very much. And it's just this one guy, like, saving Jews in secret, essentially, in the war. And did y'all ever have to read Diary of Anne Frank in school? Some people did. I remember we did read it, but I don't remember much about it. And did I read Night by Elie Wiesel? That was a good one. None of that would exist without Hitler. Great works of art that all required Hitler, which is horrible, but nonetheless true if you think about it. And that's not even the conspiracy theory. So the conspiracy theory is does anybody know Hitler's history with what he did before he became the dictator? Like what his passions were and what he wanted to be?
He wanted to be an artist. He wanted to go to this school in Austria, but they rejected him. He was all like angry and upset about it.
Yeah, they accepted some artist named Monet. Like who knows Monet? And that is of course a joke. Which I'm probably all of you are like, why is he pronouncing Monet wrong? No, that's not Monet, it's Monet, but he's still fairly well regarded, despite having a slightly different name. So we all know Monet. He's the one who paints the pretty, like, impressionist, right? As impressionist, you'd call it. Paintings of, French life. And Monet was, I'm not familiar with his painting, I just know that he's a titan of the painting world. But Hitler did not get in. I believe that they accepted Monet instead of him. It might be somebody different, but I believe that that's what happened. And he was a decent artist, but I think they said something like it's decent in terms of like capturing what's really there, but you're not doing anything new and it's not anything different. And so, has anybody heard, like, have you all ever watched there's a documentary on Netflix that I watched a long time ago, where I don't know if it was a Netflix documentary, but it was essentially like how Hitler, they had this theory that Hitler, the whole reason he went to war because he was pissed off about that whole art school thing, and that as soon as he started like taking places over, like he ended up he had this giant private art collection, like huge private art collection that was all his, and he collected like some of like the great works of art like for himself, regardless of who the artist was. I mean, whether that was an artist that was, somebody that they would probably persecute or not. And so I think that a lot of the people around him maybe wanted to destroy the art, but he wouldn't necessarily let that happen. In some cases it was destroyed, in some cases I think it wasn't. And he did he seemed to love art and want it, despite being this like seemingly crazy, ambitious dictator type. And so my crazy theory comes from this, is I wondered if he was told he wasn't a good enough artist. And has anybody read Harry Potter? You know where Voldemort? Wait, stupid. Everybody knows Voldemort. But you remember Snape, right? Anybody read all of Harry Potter? Okay, most people who are saying yes are also saying yeah. Snape was the bad guy for what, 6 books? It wasn't until the final book that it turned out he wasn't necessarily as bad as we thought. But he played the bad guy so that we could, I guess, have somebody to hate along the way. But essentially all the stuff that he was doing that was rude and mean and stuff was all kind of a smoke screen to make people not suspect him, and so he could help things happen that were supposed to happen to help Harry, and he did all of that with no, it was essentially just one giant sacrifice. I'm not saying Hitler sacrificed himself. I'm not saying that. But I mean, I wonder if he thought, he's told by art experts that he couldn't become a great artist, okay? But he wants to create great art, right? That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be an artist, but he'd been told he can't. So how do you still have an effect on the art world, yet not be able to create any art which will have that lasting effect on your own? Has anybody seen Whiplash? Oh my gosh, nobody's seen Whiplash. Oh gosh, such a great movie. Has anybody heard of La La Land, that movie that came out? It's nominated for many Oscars. The movie the guy made just before that's called Whiplash, about a drummer who wants to be like the best drummer. He wants to be like the best drummer in like jazz. He wants to be this great jazz drummer. And the jazz band director that's at the school he's going to, it's very much a tough love type scenario. He yells and curses at the kids and like makes them do like play the same notes over and over again for 3 hours straight until they get them right. Essentially, they come to hate him, but he says he does it all in service. Like, he always has this story he tells about how this one guy did the same thing over and over again, to, I want to say Miles Davis, but it's not Miles Davis. It was Charlie Parker, maybe. I think it was a trombone player. But like to the point where Charlie Parker got so mad that he took he was a saxophone player, but he took a cymbal and threw it at the band director at some point because he was so angry. And to spite him one time, like Charlie Parker plays this, he like goes off book and like just starts playing this fantastic like solo just because he's pissed off at the guy. And it becomes like one of his greatest solos ever. Because he's pissed off at that band director. So I mean, there's that idea that like some people, they like realize that they can't be great artists, so they endeavor to push people who can in order to make them create great art. And so my wild conspiracy is maybe that's what Hitler was doing. He's like, I can't make the art myself. I've been told I'm not a great artist. I'll respect their opinion, although I don't think he really did respect their opinion at the time. But maybe I'll do these things that are obviously wrong and horrible, so that then people later will end up writing about them and something beautiful will come out of this horrible thing that I've done, so I will have been the cause of all of this great art. I mean, if you think about the world since Hitler happened, I mean, there was like the world before Hitler and there was the world after Hitler. I mean, it's that big of a moment in history. Whereas like what we still consider it to be like probably what, the single greatest atrocity ever committed against mankind. And that's going to be like, it's going to have its foothold in art from now to probably at least hundreds of years from now until we do something worse, which is likely going to happen at some point. You know, somebody's going to get trigger happy and do the atom bomb thing. But still, that's like a once and done thing. I mean, you never know if it'll ever be. So that was my crazy conspiracy theory, that maybe Hitler was like thinking like this, and he's like, you know what? We do create our greatest art in pain, not in comfort. I'll just provide all of the world with this great source of pain, and then they'll create great art in response. So he's sacrificing himself in history in order to bring great art about. He sacrificed himself for art. I'm not saying he really did that. I'm saying, like, what if that's the case? So that's my crazy Hitler theory. Do I think it's real? Not really. I do think he got really pissed off and felt like he wanted to get back at all those people. I think that the art documentary that I saw was essentially kind of right. He was pissed off he couldn't become a great artist, and so he got really pissed off at the people who told him he couldn't become a great artist, and then kind of responded. Questions about that? Observations? Nichols, are you crazy? I'm not crazy. I just play a crazy guy in the classroom. Let's see. 1791. Let's go to him to intellectual beauty. On that fun note. Is it not a fun note?
What did you say?
1791. If you want to help remember it, in 1791, Columbus didn't have much fun. That actually helps y'all remember that. That's going to be hilarious. Like years from now, yeah, I remember that thing that the English teacher said that was totally irrelevant and incorrect. But that's what stuck, because it had a mnemonic device. So hymn to intellectual beauty. It is really abstract. I don't feel like he's talking about a lot of physical stuff in the world, but I think that much of what he's calling intellectual beauty becomes really relevant in Mont Blanc. I think he's taking the idea of intellectual beauty and having that be present in Mont Blanc without ever really addressing it specifically, or as specifically as he is here. So I kind of want to read this one first. Then maybe it'll make Mont Blanc a little clearer when we read it. So here we go. And here it says, and we should read this note, the intellectual means non-material, that which is beyond access to the human senses. In this poem, intellectual beauty is something postulated to account for occasional states of awareness that lend splendor, grace, and truth both to the natural world and to people's moral consciousness. And I think because he regards the intellect so highly, that's why he calls it intellectual beauty. It's like it's that intangible beauty that we can sense, but not really have specific words for or where it comes from. So he just calls it intellectual beauty. I'm going to try to read this like I have been reading stuff, which is not in verse form, because I feel like it makes most sense that way. Any questions about this before we start? No questions about anything? Stuff that's occurred to you? It popped up? Nah. Okay, so stop. Here we go. The awful shadow of some unseen power floats, though unseen, among us, or amongst us, visiting this various world with as inconstant wing as summer winds that creep from flower to flower, like moonbeams that behind some piney mountain shower. It visits with inconstant glance each human heart and countenance, like hues and harmonies of evening, like clouds and starlight widely spread, like memory of music fled, like aught that for its grace may be dear, and yet dearer for its mystery. I mean, he's just basically talking about the fleeting and magical nature of this thing right now. He hasn't really said what it is. I mean, he's kind of hinting at what it is by the images that he's providing. But the awful shadow of some unseen power floats, though unseen, among us. And it's almost like he's talking about the Force, or like, in Christianity, the Spirit. Like they got God. They got, if you've ever heard of the Holy Trinity or the Godhead Three, whatever you call it, and if you were part of the Christian religion, there's like God, like an intellectual person with a mind, essentially. I mean, it may be like an actual entity is what you think of, right? Then you have Jesus, another entity, arms, legs, thoughts. The Spirit. Like that one's a little more like the thing that's in us that makes us do the things we do. And I mean, there's less of like a mind associated, at least from the way I've always, at least the idea of the spirit, I think, is supposed to kind of contain that idea too. So I've always thought that almost like as a force, the word spirit, maybe it's not quite the same way in Christianity, but the idea of when people say spirits, one of the reasons they call liquors spirits, you ever notice that? You go to like there's wine, beer, and spirits or something like that. Just because it's kind of got that. Have you ever had like liquor before? Those who have had liquor, I'm going to assume that you've had it and you're old enough to. You may notice this with beer. I haven't really before. Maybe it's just because I've been so long since I've not had access to liqueur. But there's this vaporous quality, like that you drink a little bit and you almost notice it when you do mouthwash. You ever notice that? Mouthwash? You use mouthwash, right?
Yeah.
Every head should mouthwash. Not some of them. So yeah, when you do mouthwash, there's that weird like just alcoholiness. It's almost like, and when people usually drink their first drink of straight liquor in their life, they often will do what? Cough. Yeah, you cough or choke. It's just this weird. You don't expect for it to feel that when you drink it and you breathe in. It's like. Like it's like vapor and it's liquid at the same time, and it's weird. So it almost feels like it's a spirit in you. So I think that's why they called it spirit, because it almost feels like there's something alive in it. At least back in the day, I think when people first, what is this magic quality? And like they knew how to make it, but they didn't really know, what makes it work. They're just like, well, we know how to make this magic drink, but we don't know, like the science behind it. We just know what things we do to make it happen. And I think that he kind of thinks of this intellectual beauty in sort of the same way. It runs through everything. It exists in everything, but it's like this intangible quality that seems to always be there. And it's hard to put a name on it. So he just kind of provides images that could be the thing. And so he's talking to the spirit of beauty as though it's, I don't know if you would call this an apostrophe, but probably, where he's addressing some non-thinking entity. But he may think of it as a thinking entity, at least here. Spirit of beauty, that dost consecrate with thine own hues all thou dost shine upon of human thought or form. Where art thou gone? Why dost thou pass away and leave our state, this dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate? Ask why the sunlight not forever weaves rainbows over yon mountain river. Why aught should fail and fade that once has shone? Why fear and dream and death and birth cast on the daylight of this earth such gloom? Why man has such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope? So just as he mentions in the first stanza, there's all these, beautiful things, like you're like this and this and this. Then he mentions it. Why do you have to go away? I mean, why does the sun set and I don't know, the dark rises? I don't know. That was this weird kind of I was thinking Dark Knight Rises. That's what I was like, it makes sense. Why does it make sense? So it's like anytime there's not light or not beauty, like why does that happen? And he asks that in that stanza. No voice from some sublimer world hath ever to sage or poet these responses given. This is just such a compelling thing that he comes up with here. This is really pretty deep, although I think it's easy to understand. Maybe it's because I've read it so many times. Is it really hard to understand when you read it? Like, is it like reading some other language almost? Wasn't that bad?
You catch like every other line.
Every other line. That's what you hope for in poetry, right? Just every other idea. Maybe I'll get a hold of it. It's like wrangling cats reading poetry. It's like, yeah. Didn't catch that one because he's too quick. But okay, so no voice from sublimer world have ever to sage or poet these responses given. Essentially, it's the same question of Blake's the tiger. Remember, it's like, why does good and evil exist simultaneously? Like, I mean, why can't you have purely good? Or, why do we have to have the evil in there? It doesn't make any sense. Therefore, the name of God and ghosts in heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spells. Now, this is pretty controversial what he's saying here. He's essentially saying people's reaching to understand why evil and good can exist in the same world. That's the whole reason we've come up with religion, is a need to figure out why evil exists in the world and what good is and what's evil. So we ascribe an intellectual entity who is in charge of everything, so we can figure out why tornadoes kill some people and not others, or why lightning strikes and burns your house down but not mine. And people try to assign blame and say this person's good, this person's bad, and it's all a decision of a god. Why do horrible people do things to some people and not others? All those kind of questions that exist. And so he's saying here, and this is his really controversial opinion, is that we invented God to try to figure out good and evil, which would probably piss a lot of people off at the time that he's writing it. And he calls them frail spells. Oh, like it kind of rubs the wrong way people who believe in God, I think. Whose uttered charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see doubt, chance, and mutability. That's a little tougher for me. Let me see. Therefore, the name of God and ghosts in heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spells, their names themselves are frail spells, whose uttered charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see doubt, chance, and mutability. Okay, so despite the fact that we have those names, we have God and like the other names for other gods and stuff, like it doesn't fix this for us. We're not like able to completely sever ourselves from the idea that we don't really know. Doubt still exists, chance. We try to find meaning in everything, but we can't fully lock down everything to a meaning and a predictable outcome. Thy light alone, intellectual beauty is what he's talking about again. Like mist o'er mountains driven, or music by the night wind sent through strings of some still instrument, or moonlight on a midnight stream, gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream. So he's criticized the idea of religion and God, but then he's back to, you're the only one we should respect, intellectual beauty, the spirit of the universe, or of the world as he sees it. Next idea. Love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds depart and come, for some uncertain moments lent man were... Oh, wait, I did that thing that we sometimes do when we're at home, where I started reading and let my eyes go over the words, but didn't pay any attention to what was coming out of my mouth, so I've got to start over. Does that ever happen to you guys? It happens to me like so often when I'm reading quietly. Out loud it's a little harder, but... Love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds depart and come. For some uncertain moments lent, man were immortal and omnipotent, didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm state within his heart. Basically, man would be immortal if thou didst keep. Right. Thou messenger of sympathies that wax and wane in lovers' eyes, thou that to human thought art nourishment like darkness to a dying flame, depart not as thy shadow came, depart not lest the grave should be like life and fear a dark reality. So he's basically saying, it's almost like he has the view of intellectual beauty as the same way that people view God. People view God, at least the Christian God, as not causing evil. They say, well, anything that's evil is just something that God is not, because God is always good. So anything that is there is where God isn't, which logistically doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you have an omnipresent God. He's everywhere at once. Well, except that place. Right? Which the logic is very strange there. But he's essentially saying intellectual beauty is the same way. It's anytime that the good is gone, we have things like death, sadness. And so if you were just here all the time, we'd all be immortal. But you're not, so we aren't. Why dost thou depart? Why? 5, and this is where he's again bringing up his controversy. While yet a boy, I sought for ghosts, and sped through many a listening chamber, cave and ruin, and starlight wood, with fearful steps pursuing hopes of high talk with the departed dead. To me, even though he's saying listening chamber, cave and ruin, and starlight wood, it almost sounds to me like he's talking about like churches. Like he's gone to a listening chamber. And if you think of like a big church at the time, it's going to have that echoey quality. And like I can't think of any other place that better fits the quality of saying it could be a listening chamber. Has anybody seen that? It's a really cool video of like this high school kid, and they go like on a trip, I guess. Maybe it's a college kid, but he goes on a trip to like, I guess, some place far away. I'm assuming it's a foreign country, and they're in a big old church. And has anybody ever played Halo before? This is probably like a bad example. No. Nobody's played Halo. Just me. Well, there's this great Halo song, and it's like choir type singing that goes in the background. It really makes up the whole theme, where they're like, I don't want to sing it. But it's like a choral ode where it's like a bunch of people and like they're singing in like a very echoey chamber type. I'll just play it out loud. You might not be able to hear it, Ethan, but if you've played Halo, you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to sing. I'm afraid you can't do a bunch of people singing justice. Halo theme. See if I can get it real loud. Doesn't that sound cool? That was a video game scene, isn't that interesting? Just a bunch of guys singing in a church. And it's got that echoey sound. So there was a kid who was really funny. He was like a high school or college kid, and what he did was he went to some big church somewhere, and like his buddy was like, okay, go. And it was like on a cell phone, and then he starts like singing it in this church. And the kid's not even that great a singer, but in that giant church, it just was like echoes everywhere, echo, echo, echo. And so he sounded like almost as good as these professional singers did. But I think that when I think of listening chamber, it's like a place that you could listen there because the noises are just so echoey. It's just that to me, like a church almost seems like a listening chamber, like a chamber where listening happens. Also, the implication of listening to a preacher talk, so you're listening in this chamber. So to me, I think that that's kind of his image for a church. And he says cave and ruin. Cave implying it's really old and something unformed, and ruin, a negative connotation. Caves are in ruin, thus the churches to him are in ruin. And the starlight wood I don't fully get. I don't understand that one. But with fearful steps pursuing hopes of high talk with the departed dead. So he wanted to, in his youth as a boy, seeking for ghosts. I think is what he's calling, God and Jesus and that kind of stuff. And he says, I called on poisonous names with which our youth is fed. And down here in 6 it says, these lines refer to Shelley's youthful experiments with magic and conjuring. In one manuscript version, this line reads, I called on that false name with which our youth is fed. The next line continues, he answered not. This version would have clinched Shelley's scandalous reputation for atheism. So he's saying it in close enough a way where it seems he could be talking about like witchcraft or something.
See, that's what I thought it was.
Right, but he's essentially calling God and Christianity witchcraft, which is the negativity which he's referring. And he says, I was not heard, I saw them not. Then when musing deeply on the lot of life at that sweet time when winds are wooing all vital things that wake to bring news of buds and blossoming, sudden thy shadow fell on me. I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy. So he's like, I was looking for God, couldn't find him, he didn't find me. But instead, I discovered the intellectual beauty, the spirit that moves through the world of beauty, this intangible beauty quality. He's sounds pretty racy, isn't he? He's like, what god? In the 1800s. Crazy? I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Have I not kept the vow? With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now I call the phantoms of 1,000 hours, each from his voiceless grave. It's interesting, he's so vehemently and like direly and almost desperately pleading to intellectual beauty, which I guess based on his definitions of gods would not hear him or even exist. It's very interesting that he's come up with his own like god. It's not really God, but it's a thing that moves through everything and is everything, except bad things. Sounds a lot like God. They have envisioned bowers. Oh, sorry, I have it itchy. I gotta fix it. Okay. They have envisioned bowers of studious zeal or love's delight, outwatched with me the envious night. What? Stayed up until the night, envious of their delight, had reluctantly departed. I guess he's talking about the ghosts of the grave that he's talking about, the phantoms of 1,000 hours. They know that never joy illumined my brow, unlinked with hope that thou wouldst free this world from its dark slavery, that thou, O awful loveliness, now he's calling intellectual beauty, O awful loveliness. And by the way, not awful in the sense that not good, but sense of full of awe, that which brings awe. Wouldst give whatever these words cannot express. So he's like, if he tries to express the words, but he can't, but he's hoping that the intellectual beauty will provide him that which he cannot express. And he always has hope that it'll just make everything better. And then 7, the day becomes more solemn and serene when noon is past. Is that true? Maybe he's in Britain, I guess, so it's maybe a little different there. I feel like in Texas, the day passes noon, it just gets unbearable. That's what I think. Except this winter's been kind of okay. You know? It's been kind of nice. There is harmony in autumn, and a luster in its sky, which through the summer is not heard or seen, as if it could not be, as if it had not been. Just saying, there's actually something nice about autumn, which is the bringer of death, if you think about it. There's something even nice and solemn about the afternoon that's not there in the morning. Some intangible, nice quality. Thus let thy power, which like the truth of nature on my passive youth descended, to my onward life supply its calm. To one who worships thee in every form containing thee, whom spirit fair thy spells did bind to fear himself and love all humankind. So he says, you've been there for my morning time in life, please be there for my evening in life. And though I am moving closer to death, I'd like for that beauty to still be there, to cast hope and happiness on my later days as well. He couldn't have known that his later days were that much closer than he thought. Let's see, 5 years from this. Good Lord, he was 25 when he wrote this. What was I doing when I was 25? I think I was playing Halo. That's about all I was doing. No, I was doing other stuff too, I guess. Trying to get a master's degree. What do you think about that? Do you think we should all just drop whatever religions we have and start doing the whole intellectual beauty thing, or stick with... Not even any comments on a religion question? Goodness gracious. You're like, yeah, it's whatever. I'll stick with my God, I guess. I wasn't really asking that, of course. Maybe that's what y'all are just... I know he's not really asking. So, 1788, a couple pages back. We have Mont Blanc. Hard poem. I think. Do you think it was easy? Difficult for me, at least the first few times I read it. My many notes in the margins and underlines are likely the result of that. It's funny too, because I look back at my notes now and I go, why did I write this? This doesn't actually make any sense to me. So I'm going to go down and read the note like usual. And it's a big note, but I think it's all really important to understanding the poem. Like if you didn't read it, maybe if you read it now, you're like, oh, now the poem kind of makes more sense. Which I'll bring it close to my face so I can actually see it, but still turn my head so the microphone can hear me. Mont Blanc, in which Shelley both echoes and argues with the poetry of natural description written by Wordsworth and Coleridge. Was first published as the conclusion of the history of a 6 weeks tour. Turns out that I'm not as strong a man as I had hoped, so I can't hold the book like that. This was a book that Percy and Mary Shelley wrote together, the 6 weeks tour, the history of a 6 weeks tour, detailing the excursion that they and Claire Claremont took in July 1816 to the valley of Chamonix in what is now southeastern France. I thought of something funny from The Office. That valley lies at the foot of Mont Blanc, the highest mountain in the Alps in all Europe. So, not to be outdone, Wordsworth writes about Tintern Abbey. Shelley writes about the biggest mountain in Europe. Just something about that is so Shelley to me. It's just like, oh, you write about the biggest mountain in Europe, which I just thought was so him. In the history, Percy Shelley commented on his poem, "It was composed under the immediate impression of the deep and powerful feelings excited by the objects it attempts to describe, and, as an indisciplined overflowing of the soul rests disclaimed approbation on an attempt to imitate the untamable wildness and inaccessible solemnity from which those feelings sprang." Basically, he's saying he can't fully express what he saw and the feelings it gave him, but he tries, though he says he didn't come close. Something about that, I don't know, just seems sincere from him. When he says stuff like that, it seems like he sincerely thinks that he wasn't able to fully capture it, but he really did try. It doesn't feel like a Coleridge kind of claim where it feels kind of joking. To me, it feels legitimate from him. I don't know why. He was inspired to write the poem while standing on a bridge spanning the river Arve, which flows through the valley of Chamonix and is fed from above by the melltop of the glacier, the Mer de Glace. So if you think about it, he's on a bridge standing looking at the river, which is flowing through a ravine, which is fed from the water by the snow of the Great Mountain. So you can see all of that in like one image. He's on a bridge standing over a river that's fed from the mountain in front of him. That's got to look pretty cool. And you're on that bridge over the river. As you look down, river, chasm, mountain, it's pretty cool. And then this is what kind of echoes throughout the whole poem is the next thing that he talks about here. In a letter to Thomas Love Peacock, drafted in the same week as Mont Blanc, Shelley had recalled that the Count de Buffon, a French pioneer of the science we now know as geology, had proposed a sublime but gloomy theory. This is considered a theory at the time, not even true science. But it's like on its way to be, I think. That this globe which we inhabit will at some future period be changed to a mass of frost. This sense which Shelley takes from Buffon of a nature that is utterly alien and indifferent to human beings, and whose history takes shape on a timescale of incomprehensible immensity, is counterposed throughout Mont Blanc with Shelley's interest, fueled by his reading of 18th century skeptics such as David Hume in questions about the human mind, its powers, and the limits of knowledge. All things exist as they are perceived, at least in relation to the percipient, Shelley would later write in A Defense of Poetry. In Mont Blanc, the priority that this statement gives to the mind over the external world is challenged by the sheer destructive power of the mountain. So he's got two ideas that are somewhat vying for power in this poem. One is that the mind perceives that which it perceives and thus has some power over it, but only from the perspective of the mind. So whatever our perceptions are, we are in control of that which we perceive, essentially. So, if I perceive my water bottle there, I have the power of perception over that water bottle. And if I'm not there to think about it, the water bottle has really no significance. However, it is still there. And so to him, like he uses Mont Blanc as like, despite the fact that he might not be there to think about it, the mountain still exists with its sheer destructive power and stature. Even though he wants to believe that us thinking about it is the thing that really makes it meaningful, not the thing itself. And also he's under the awareness that the Earth is on this immense time scale and probably wasn't invented. Like some people still, I don't know if this is everybody. It's been so long since I think I once upon a time may have thought this, but I feel like even when I was young, I didn't ever really truly think it. That the Earth is like 6,000 years old. When people trace back the generations in the Bible, that's kind of what it adds up to. But, I mean, if you look at everything that science seems to show about the world, it's on a billions of year time scale from the beginning of the universe to now. So there's lots of years involved there. And that would mean that it's likely that whenever we've come to be, we'll eventually be gone, and this place will still be here. The Earth will still be there, and that's what he's looking at and how he sees it. I don't know if he's thinking millions of years or what he's thinking in terms of years. I just know that he's thinking that the Earth will be here long after we're gone, and his idea that the Earth. I mean, we know that at some point, I believe, whatever's on the Earth will burn up because the sun's going to go. What is it? It's going to go from.
It's either going to have a supernova.
Eventually, it's got to do that. But I think that even before that, it's going to go from a. What is it? Is it a red giant? Our sun?
Yes, I think so. Well, I don't know if it is now. Red giant's like the last stage.
Well, maybe it's going to go to a red giant. Right now, it's a.
There's stages. I can't remember.
Whatever stage it is, it's going to go from what it is now to something bigger and more expansive. It's going to basically burn up all of our chance at life on the Earth, I think. Which I think is something similar that happened to either Mars long ago, or Mars actually got too far from energy and it lost all of its life. So essentially, I think that Mars is almost the world of frost we're talking about. But this guy's thinking that moisture would still exist. That's why he's thinking world of frost. I mean, if you think about if you introduce any moisture into the Mars atmosphere, it's going to instantly turn to ice and frost. So I think that's kind of what he was thinking about, is the world that's so frozen it can no longer support life. So I mean, that's his world of frost he's talking about. So he's thinking that this might eventually happen with this mountain that he's looking at, with the world that we're in now, while wanting to believe that poetry matters and that the perception that we have of things is important. And those two things are kind of warring at each other in this poem. And also he's kind of, you feel the intellectual beauty idea throughout this as well. Like that's part of all of it, part of us, part of it, part of his views of poetry, and part of the mountain itself. Lots of things going on. So let's get started now that we've spent 5 minutes introducing the idea to understand this poem. Now we can actually start to understand it. The everlasting universe of things flows to the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings of waters, with a sound but half its own, such as a feeble brook will oft assume in the wild woods among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves. And I think that the key statement here that he makes, does anybody want to guess what I'm going to say the key thing that he says here that sets itself apart from the whole rest of the stanza is? A collection, a phrase that he says that makes this, he's both saying this thing and kind of contending with himself at the same time. It's a tough question. I'm not going to lie. Is when he says, with a sound but half its own. Because with a sound but half its own, it's like the mountain is creating all this, the river's creating all this, the river's flowing through this valley, it's bursting and raving, it's doing all the stuff that nature does, but it's a sound but half its own. Literally, the tree falls in the forest. Did we talk about that last time? We did? Okay. If a tree falls in the forest, nobody's there to hear it, does it still fall? Or does it still make a sound, I guess? So with a sound but half its own is that idea, the sound not there to be heard doesn't really happen. And he's almost arguing that it happens, but only halfway. We perceive it, thus it happens, but like the other half, I don't know. And he's kind of leaving that open to interpretation. Thus thou, ravine of Arv. So he's talking about the ravine that's at the bottom of the mountain that has the river. So it's actually talking, he uses that as a subject for this whole thing. Dark, deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail fast cloud shadows and sunbeams. Awful scene, awe-inspiring, like I said before, where power in likeness of the Arv comes down from the ice gulfs that gird his secret throne, the mountain, bursting through these dark mountains like the flame of lightning through the tempest. He's really trying to be violent in his imagery here of the way nature works and the way weather is, because of that whole geology thing that he's been into. Thou dost lie, thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging, children of elder time. I really like that phrase, children of elder time. That's fun. And elder just meaning earlier, ancient, but I like the word elder better. In whose devotion chainless winds still come and ever came to drink their odors, and their mighty swinging to hear an old and solemn harmony. I almost think of this like, have y'all had a chance to see, it's really weird that this came out with a different movie, but did y'all watch, has anybody seen Moana? Okay, did I already ask that last time? I feel like I asked that last time. No? Have you seen the little short film that came out with the last Disney movie called Lava?
Yes.
You know, it's just two volcanoes singing to each other, basically. But I mean, it's really weird. You're watching it, and it goes down on like this micro level, and you see like the little animals and stuff that are falling in love around the volcano. But then it like focuses off, and you see like the volcano's got a face, and it's sad because it can't fall in love. But eventually, guess what, guys? The volcanoes do fall in love, and they get together, and somehow they're able to actually physically combine. They make this happen. But it's weird because, like, if you think about like a volcano, it literally it's like an island with like a ecosystem and everything, and you see like birds fly next to like that thing's face, like really tiny. And it's kind of what he's talking about here. He's talking about the mountain as an entity that has thought. He's kind of personifying it. But then he's also saying everything goes around you and acts around you like it always has. Like the wind. I believe he said. What is it he said about the wind is blowing? Chainless winds still come and ever came to drink their odors, from the odors of the river and the ravine coming from you. And their mighty swinging to hear an old and solemn harmony. Thine earthly rainbows stretched across the sweep of the ethereal waterfall, whose veil robes some unsculptured image. What is that? Not formed by humans? Oh, right. So unsculptured meaning not sculpted upon. It's just formed of nature. The strange deep, which when the voices of the desert fail, wraps all in its own deep eternity. Thy caverns echoing to the Arb's commotion, a loud, lone sound no other sound can tame. Thou art pervaded with, he's building up the immensity and the power of the mountain. Thou art the path of, thou art pervaded with that ceaseless motion. Thou art the path of that unresting sound, dizzy ravine. Oh, right. So I keep forgetting he's talking about the ravine, not the mountain. And when I gaze on thee, I seem as in a trance, sublime and strange, to muse on my own separate fantasy. My human mind. This is where he gets really crazy in terms of like philosophy. So he's talked about how nature, power of nature, nature. You are the real thing, nature. But then he says, my own human mind. He gets back to his intellectual beauty idea. And he says, my human mind, which passively now renders and receives fast influencings, holding an unremitting interchange with the clear universe of things around. In essence, I think it's what Wordsworth said when he said, we perceive and half create that which we perceive. So we're taking the mountain in, shaping it with our intellect, and it's like we're forming it in our minds, and it takes on meaning in our minds. So we're like partly creating this. We're receiving signals that we then interpret, but that interpretation is something that we can't help, and it's happening. So who knows if the mountain purely exists in our mind as it really exists in the world, or we're adding to or taking away from whatever it actually is in reality. Like, is there true reality that exists outside of the mind, or does reality only exist within the mind as we perceive it? And if it helps a little bit, think of somebody who's colorblind. You ever seen those videos on the internet where they come out with these glasses that, depending on what type of color blindness you have, they have these glasses they can make, which somehow it refracts light in such a way in certain wavelengths in your eyes that your eyes can actually see colors, because it does what your eyes can't to provide your brain the signals it needs to actually see the colors as they're meant. I have no idea how it works, but there's these glasses you can buy, and they're like $300 to $500, maybe even more. But I've seen all these videos on YouTube where you go watch them, like watch like colorblind see color glasses or something like that, colorblind glasses, and it shows like a dad going, yeah, somebody got me these glasses, and like I just, I'm outside and they told me to go outside and try them out, and actually there's a warning that says you may be like unable to bear at first seeing colors for the first time, so don't overload yourself too quickly or something like that, 'cause it can like, you can be crazy. But his dad, he like takes his glass and he goes, yeah, okay, and he puts them on. And he's like, holy, and he's like just wandering around looking at certain things he's never seen have colors before. He's like, oh my gosh, this flower, is this purple? Like he's asking questions. He's like, I've never seen it before, and he's like asking about and he sees his kid's eyes for the first time, like knows that they're a certain color that he couldn't be able to see before. It's like crazy. But think about the way colorblind people see the world, and they're not seeing it accurately, maybe in the way we're seeing it. I once read for somewhere, or somebody said that color doesn't actually exist. It's just something our brains have come up with to have a way of interpreting living things from dead things so we can better find food and not fall into water and drown. But I don't know. Part of me, if certain things reflect in certain wavelengths, I would think that that would be true regardless of our eyeballs. But I don't. Now maybe we've interpreted the meaning of colors that way. I don't 100% know if that's true or not. I'm not a scientist. But it does kind of hold true that, I mean, think about colorblind people. They perceive the world differently than we do. And if they now see the way they perceive, they go, oh, that's something different. Imagine if we perceive it not as well as we think. And did y'all know there's some people who can see, I think it's like, there are people who can see like 2 million more shades of light than us. There's some people who can see ultraviolet rays. Like they can see ultraviolet light. And to them it has a color. I don't know why it's not more common. You'd think that'd be something that genetically would be carried down, because that sounds cool. Maybe everything that's cool isn't necessarily helpful. But so there's people who can perceive the world a way that we don't even get to perceive it. We don't even know what that's like. So I mean, it kind of holds true what he's talking about. There is nature, and then there's that which we perceive, and it's kind of nature, but not fully. Next idea. One legion of wild thoughts, whose wandering wings now float above thy darkness, and now rest where that or thou art no unbidden guess. In the still cave of the witch poesy, seeking among the shadows that pass by, ghosts of all things that are, some shade of thee, some phantom, some faint image, till the breast from which they fled recalls them, thou art there. I think he's... It says lines written in the Vale of Chamonix, so he wrote it there or after he got home? Yeah, he was inspired to write it while he was standing on the bridge. So he remembered as much as he could, then went home to write it. So what he's writing about here at the end is now the mountain exists in the cave of the witch poesy, basically the muse that brings poetry to the mind. And he's like, it's like his mental cave where all like the images exist. So the mountain now exists in his mind. And so he's brought it back with him, only in a sense. Because if you think he's not standing in front of the mountain, he's not just like recording images he's seeing. He's remembering back to what he did see, and both remembering and half creating what the nature of reality and truth. This is some cool stuff. I love this stuff. Y'all love this stuff as much as I do? No. You should long to. I like it. That's not good enough. Purely love it. Oh, awful loveliness. Stanza 3. Oh, good, we made it to 3. Awesome. Some say that gleams of a remoter world visit the soul in sleep. That death is slumber, and that its shapes the busy thoughts outnumber of those who wake and live. I'm not familiar with... that was weird. Familiar with that viewpoint. I mean, I don't know who he's referring to specifically, and I wish they provided a note, but I don't think they do. But I look on high. Has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and death? Oh, I think he's... I guess there was an idea that God gave us dreams, and that later death is just a form of sleep. Oh, yes, that's what he's talking about. and that its shapes and the busy thoughts outnumber of those who wake and live. So once we're dead, we're merely asleep in body and we're alive in spirit in heaven, and that's way better than what we have here, and we perceive so much more. So he's making fun of that, I guess, in a sense, or saying he contrasts with that idea. He doesn't buy it. I look on high. Has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and death? He's like, says God solved it? I don't think so. Some God solved it, probably what he said. Or do I lie and dream, and does the mightier world of sleep spread far around inaccessibly its circles? He's like, is the dream up there in heaven? Am I the one dreaming? Is this real at all? Like, am I alive right now? It's just so weird. For the very spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep that vanishes among the viewless gales. I wasn't paying attention to what I was reading. Spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep that vanishes among the viewless gales, far above, piercing the infinite sky. Oh, it just hasn't. Mont Blanc appears. Still, snowy, and serene. It's above all this, the mountains there. Its subject mountains, their unearthly forms pile around it, ice and rock, broad veils between of frozen floods, and fathomable deeps, blue as the overhanging heaven that spread and wind among the accumulated steeps, a desert peopled by the storms alone. So there's just storms here, no people. Save when the eagle brings some hunter's bone, or the wolf tracks are there. How hideously its shapes are heaped around, rude, bare, and high, this big giant mountain just existing there, unsculptured, ghastly, scarred, and riven. Is this the scene where the old earthquake demon taught her young ruin? What was that poem? Who wrote the poem? Oh, it was Kubla Khan with Demon Lover. Does it mention that here? 9. Intricately formed, derived from Daedalus, builder of the labyrinth in Crete. I guess, but it sounds like Kubla Khan. But I don't know who wrote what first. Were these their toys, or did a sea of fire envelop once this silent snow? So he's wondering, is this like the play place of the god where they were throwing rocks around? Or was this just a sea of fire that once enveloped all of this, and now over time it's formed into a hard-packed earth? He's trying to, I think, resolve like reality based on the many different accounts of it. None can reply. All seems eternal now. Because he's asking the questions, and nobody can say, oh, this is reality. Oh, this is what happened. The wilderness has a mysterious tongue which teaches awful doubt, meaning, as he says, awe-filled open-mindedness. Or faith so mild, so solemn, so serene that man they be but for such faith with nature reconciled. What faith? Only through holding such faith. In such wise faith with nature reconciled in such a faith. Okay. Thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repeal large codes of fraud and woe, not understood by all, but which the wise and great and good interpreter make felt or deeply feel. To repeal large codes of fraud and woe. You have a voice not understood by all, but which the wise, the great, and good interpret. Okay. So I think essentially he's saying here, and he's referring back to that geologist, and essentially you can think of it as science. He's essentially saying like that the science is and those theories of the universe provide the truth, and it reveals or repeals large codes of fraud and woe, basically Christianity and other ideas of God that exist, which the geology and science show are ridiculous. So if you just look at this, you would know, is what he's saying. Not necessarily what I'm saying, but it's just what he's saying. And then we get to stanza 4. So he's saying basically this is all that exists in the universe, is what we see here and now. The fields, the lakes, the forests, and the streams, ocean, and all the living things that dwell within the daedal earth. Lightning and rain, earthquake and fiery flood and hurricane. The torpor of the year when feeble dreams visit the hidden buds, or dreamless sleep holds every future leaf and flower. The bound with which from that detested trance they leap. The works and ways of man, their death and birth, and that of him and all that his may be. All things that move and breathe with toil and sound are born and die. Revolve, subside, and swell. That's a happy thought, huh? Basically, everything that we've talked about, everything in the universe, the thunder, the lightning, everything is born, everything that's living is born and dies. And that's the truth of it, and it's going to happen like that for eternity. How fun. Power dwells apart in its tranquility, remote, serene, and inaccessible. So it's essentially like, nature is so strong and eternal that it's just sits there quiet, not really caring one way or the other what we think about it. And this, the naked countenance of earth on which I gaze, even these primeval mountains teach the adverting mind. Observe it. The glaciers creep like snakes that watch their prey from their far fountains slow rolling on. Much of the time he spends a whole lot of this poem, and it takes a while to get used to this, he just spends a whole lot of time describing vast, big, epic nature things. Spends a whole lot of time just doing it, and you're like, well, okay, what's this sentence mean? What's it trying to do? Well, it's just showing us some big, vast image a lot of the time. The glaciers creep like snakes that watch their prey from their far fountains, slow rolling on. There, many a precipice, frost and the sun and scorn of mortal power have piled. Dome, pyramid, and pinnacle, a city of death, distinct with many a tower and wall impregnable of beaming ice. Yet not a city, but a flood of ruin is there, that from the boundaries of the sky rolls its perpetual stream. Vast pines are strewing its destined path, or in the mangled soil, branchless and shattered stand. The rocks, drawn down from yon remotest waste, have overthrown the limits of the dead and living world, never to be reclaimed. The dwelling place of insects, beasts, and birds become its spoil. Saying when the rock rolls down the mountain, it ends up in the living world. Their food and their retreat forever gone, so much of life and joy is lost. The race of man flies far in dread, his work and dwelling vanish like smoke before the tempest stream, and their place is not known. Below, vast caves shine. So there's really no place for man here, is essentially what he's saying. It's like, we've left this dwelling place because there's no place for us here. Have you ever thought about how, like, you know, what's not the word timid, that's not what I'm trying to think, or fickle, how fragile our existence is here. Like, if we go too far down, like into the water, you know, we drown. I mean, I guess we could go down in the earth, but only to a certain point would it still be habitable down there. But we can go up, but only a little bit, or we run out of air. Like, there's like this thin, like, I think they said that if you considered the atmosphere that we're able to survive in on the earth, and you made like I think the earth as big as like a basketball, the atmosphere is thinner than if you had a sphere of paper that's encircled the basketball. Like, it would be thinner than the paper on that basketball, the atmosphere that we live in. But it's really pretty from far away, I think. Now, go look that up and prove me wrong. That really sounds like I'm getting something wrong there. It could be a billiard ball. It could be a bowling ball. Might have the details a little bit wrong. But I know it's really thin. There's only a very small space on this earth we can even survive. And he's saying we've already fled from the mountaintops, the scary mountaintops of the frozen stuff. Man flies far in dread. His work and dwelling vanish like smoke before the tempest stream, and their place is not known below. Vast caves shine in the rushing torrent's restless gleam, which from those secret chasms and tumult welling meet in the vale in one majestic river. The breath and blood of distant lands forever rolls its loud waters to the ocean waves, breathes its swift vapors to the circling air. And I think that he's talking about here, I mean, it might be confusing me a little in the image, but I think it's like the breath of other places. So like the air comes in from other places and then mingles and becomes the snow, and then it, you know, melts and becomes the river, and then it's all this stuff is from everywhere. It hasn't just always resided just right here. And he talks about that a little bit more in the last stanza as well. In all this, Mont Blanc yet gleams on high. The power is there, the still and solemn power of many sights and many sounds and much of life and death. That's much of what he's described here, is the many sights and sounds. In the calm darkness of the moonless nights, in the lone glare of day, the snows descend upon that mountain. None beholds them there. If you think about that, that's true. Like, he knows that, like, when he's not there, and when most of the time is happening on the far side of the mountain where they don't have a bridge that goes near that, the snow falls on the far side of the mountain that nobody sees. But the snow is still there. Just nobody sees it. Nor when the flakes burn in the sinking sun and become the water, or the starbeams dart through them. Winds contend silently there and heap the snow with breath rapid and strong, but silently. Essentially, like, we don't hear it. Its home, the voiceless lightning in these solitudes keeps innocently, and like vapor broods over the snow. The secret strength of things which governs thought, and to the infinite dome of heaven is as a law, inhabits thee. And what were thou, Mont Blanc, and earth and stars and sea, if to the human mind's imagining silence and solitude were vacancy? And I don't think he ends this with an answer. He ends it with a question. You know, it does end with a question mark, yes, but I don't think that that's one of those questions that's rhetorical. And it's like, what would you be without us? I mean, I really think he's saying, what would you be without us? I mean, we have no actual concept of understanding because we have perspective on that, and we can't divorce ourselves from that perspective. Like I was talking to the other students today, that there's 2 students who had to read Oedipus, and there's a character named Tiresias, and I explained to them that Tiresias, which will come up in this class in the Wasteland, so it's important to remember this. Story of Tiresias from Greek mythology. He was a guy who saw some snakes. I think they were having sex. Yeah, and I think that another student explained to me that it's almost like they're fighting, like they look like they're just writhing together when they're, doing that, or there's some sort of insemination that comes out of like the snake's body, and then somehow the eggs gets fertilized in the females. I have no idea how snake sex works. I don't know. So I might look it up later just to see. But he saw it happening. It looked like they were fighting / having sex, so he smacks them with his staff, and he gets turned into a woman. I don't remember exactly why, but he changes Tiresias into a woman. And he's a woman for like 7 or 8 years. Thinking he's a woman forever, he goes ahead and starts building relationships sometimes with men, and he experiences the love that a woman would experience with another man. And then later he sees snakes again doing the same thing. He says, hey, if this caused me to turn woman before, maybe if I smack him again, it'll make me man. And he smacks him, and sure enough, he turns back to man. Now later, these 2 gods are trying to settle an argument. They're arguing over whether it's more pleasurable for a female in making love, or it's more pleasurable for the male in making love. The man claims it's the woman who has more pleasure, and the woman god claims that it's the men who have more pleasure in lovemaking. And they ask Tiresias, they say, who has more pleasure? You're the only one who can answer this because you've lived as both man and woman and have experienced both. And he says, that's true, I am the one who's done this. And he says, what I can tell you is that it is more pleasurable, to make love as a woman. And now the woman god who hears this now just lost the bet. It pisses her off. So she blinds Tiresias in the eyes. And you can't reverse what another god has done, I don't think. So the god who basically won the bet because of Tiresias felt bad, so he instead gave him the gift of, he couldn't restore his sight, but he gave him the gift of prophecy, which is, seeing the future, so he knows what's going to happen despite not being able to see it with his physical eyes. And so we got to talking about that today, and I started thinking about it, and despite the fact that he said, well, women have it more pleasurably, but he can only say that having started out in his life as a man. So had he started out as a woman, then become a man, then gone back to a woman, would he say the men's was more pleasurable? Because he can only have it from that frame of perspective where he started out as a man and still identified himself as that. And when he was a woman, he thought, well, I'll just deal with this. But he always, I guess, identified himself as a man. And then in the pleasure of making love, I guess he determined that it's more pleasurable for a female. But then that's still just from the perspective of a man. So even this, where he's saying, what would you be if to the human mind's imagining silence and solitude were vacancy? I think that really is a question, because we can only ask these questions from the perspective that we are us and we have always been us. We can't ever fully come outside of our perspective and see it from something else that's out of us. It's not possible. We might want to, but the fact that we were born in these bodies and we've lived in them is something we can never fully change despite our attempts to. Maybe if later we figure out how to upload our consciousnesses to machines over the many thousands of years, millions of years, maybe we'll forget. But then if we're machines, we've got really great memory, right? So probably not. I don't know. But he's questioning here, and I don't think he provides answers. And I think that that's exactly the way we would end with Shelley, is despite the fact that he has this, what I consider to be an ego about his thoughts and what he thinks is right in the world, and Wordsworth, you're wrong to do this, and people are wrong. I really think that the end of Mont Blanc ends on more of a, this is the way the world is, but this is how we humans think about it, and what's the right answer here? And he just ends on a question, and that's a kind of a humble way to end. Like, I don't really know. I don't think anybody could know, but that's where he stops. What are we reading next time? Let me look. John Keats. Keats are all pretty short, pretty readable. So I don't think I have to prepare you a lot for him. You know, just read through the poems a couple of times because they're pretty dense in terms of language, even though they're kind of short. And I'll probably tell you right now, I won't be talking much about To Autumn. But the rest I will. You have a good one.
Have you already posted the video that you were waiting?
Yes, I did, but I had a bunch of internet troubles in my house the last 2 days. And I was able to, and also, did I ever tell you that I rendered the video wrong and forgot to include the piece?
Yeah.
So I re-rendered it and uploaded it from this school today, like during my second class. So it's there now. I think, let me see, does it still say, oh, I guess I closed the window, but it did it, yeah. You betcha. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's what I tried.